In 1925, the highly influential Caterham father and son rented a country villa in England called Chimney to host a grand party. Numerous high society figures gathered there. Mr. Caterham, speaking mysteriously to the two ladies of the house, revealed that his most important purpose was actually to meet with the foreign minister to promote a top-secret project. So what exactly was this top-secret project they were talking about? At the party, Aileen reunited with Wade, the man she secretly admired. He had fought alongside Aileen's brother on the battlefield as a comrade, and he was the one who had personally brought her brother's body home for burial. Therefore, the two families had a very close relationship. They had never had the chance to confess their feelings to each other. Wade secretly revealed to Aileen that he had prepared a mysterious surprise for her later. Intelligent as Aileen was, she naturally understood that Wade was about to confess his love. At the party, there was a well-known, malicious prank. Two masked men who worked with Wade at the State Department had secretly hidden alarm clocks in various corners of his room, intending to wake him up in a panic the next morning. However, the next day, the alarm clocks blared loudly throughout the mansion on time. No one heard the screams they had anticipated. Aileen felt uneasy, so she hurried upstairs to Wade's room. The man who had been healthy and energetic the night before was now lying unusually silent in bed, having stopped breathing long ago. The doctor found that Wade had overdosed on sleeping pills. A new police officer was assigned to investigate. While handling the bottle of pills, he clumsily spilled water onto a glass on the bedside table. The doctor concluded that Wade died accidentally, as mixing alcohol and pills would never produce good results. Aileen completely disagreed with this conclusion. Because Wade had always slept very well, he never needed any sleep aids. That's why the two masked men, Ronnie and Fatty, came up with the idea of setting an alarm clock as a prank. Furthermore, they claimed Wade had been under a lot of work pressure lately. If an accident was ruled out, the only possibility left was that he had done something reckless. Aileen didn't want to stay and listen to their wild speculations. She was about to leave when she noticed the lacquered clocks neatly placed on the fireplace. Ronnie and Fatty had said they had hidden them the night before, so why were they in such a prominent position? At the same time, Jamie rushed to Aileen and said that he and Wade had played cards with the Caterham couple the night before. Everything had changed overnight. He knew Aileen would be deeply shocked, so he had come specifically to comfort her. Aileen, already stressed, finally broke down in tears upon hearing Jamie's concern. Their stay at Jamie's villa wasn't over yet, but this incident had led the Caterham couple to leave early. Once Wade's room was empty, Aileen returned to the scene to investigate. Besides the 7 strange alarm clocks on the fireplace, she noticed something suspicious. The dust on the bedside table. The medicine bottle, left overnight, had a square mark, while the stemmed glass, wet by the police, showed no trace. She checked the entire room and finally found a circular mark on the desk. The glass should have been there, so who had moved it to the bedside table? She picked up the pen Wade used when he was alive and realized he seemed to have written something there the night before. She opened the bookshelf drawers but found no useful clues. Her emotions crumbled even more intensely than before. She wielded a crowbar, smashing things and shouting loudly to vent her pain at losing the one she loved. The maid standing outside the door was about to comfort her when her mother stopped her, saying they had to allow her to grieve. After calming down, she found a letter hidden in the binder of a book. It was Wade's note, in which he said he wanted to talk to his sister and mentioned the phrase, 7 dials. Aileen looked at the clocks on the fireplace, and a thought flashed through her mind. There were 7 clocks here too. Could this also be a reference to what Wade was talking about? She asked her mother if she knew what 7 dials meant. Her mother said that there was a place in the slums with that name. It was an area that people of their status had never set foot in. Aileen explained her entire reasoning about the cause of Wade's death. Clearly, the night before he had been planning a surprise for the following Tuesday. It could be a declaration of love or even a marriage proposal. How could someone who had decided to die plan something like that? Her mother didn't understand, because Wade was an upright and well-liked man who would want to harm him. At last night's dinner party, Wade was assigned by the foreign minister to serve Mrs. Caterham. Although she wasn't entirely pleased with him, it wasn't to the point where she would poison him. Aileen suddenly remembered something very strange. The night before the Caterhams passed away, Mrs. Caterham seemed to have scolded the maid so severely that she burst into tears. After Aileen left her mother, she went for a walk alone in the garden. She was drawn to a familiar ticking sound. On the lawn lay a broken alarm clock, immediately reminding her of the cruel prank from the previous night. She called Ronnie and learned that he and Fatty had actually hidden a total of 8 alarm clocks that night. But only 7 were in the room, so the one on the lawn must be the 8th one that was missing. Someone must have been in Wade's room. Aileen felt something was amiss, so she went to ask the housekeeper. The housekeeper said Wade's bedside table was only used for breakfast and never for anything else. Furthermore, the housekeeper had never heard the servants mention Wade having a habit of using sleeping sleeping pills, as he always slept very well. So Eileen went to the servants' quarters to question the maid. Upon entering, she saw a square weld mark on the table, identical to the marks on the sleeping pill bottles that had been on Wade's bedside table. Faced with this situation, the maid had to admit that the sleeping pill bottle was hers. Because of the long period of caring for the Caterham couple, the pressure had increased, so she had asked Mrs. Caterham for a bottle of sleeping pills. But that evening, upon returning to her room after the party, she discovered the bottle was gone. Since it wasn't anything valuable, she hadn't paid much attention to it. Unexpectedly, Wade had gotten into trouble the next morning. Mrs. Caterham, fearing she would be implicated, had severely reprimanded the maid. Meanwhile, the maid told Eileen that the sleeping pills were very potent, so just a small amount would cause a deep sleep. The bottle the police found was empty, indicating Wade had drunk the entire bottle. Therefore, his death was understandable. However, it would be difficult for any normal person, no matter how severe their insomnia, to drink an entire bottle. Thus, Eileen's suspicion was correct. Wade died as a result of murder. It was only because of the lack of concrete evidence that the police concluded Wade's death was an accident. Only Eileen insisted on continuing the investigation with Ronnie. During this time, she noticed a man secretly following her. After a brief eye contact, the man panicked and left. Just then, Mrs. Caterham appeared nearby to attend to some business. Eileen stopped her and questioned why she had concealed the sleeping pills. If she had admitted it earlier, the police might have continued their investigation. But compared to the death of an ordinary person, the reputation of the aristocracy was clearly more important. Eileen gave Ronnie the letter she had found. It mentioned the highly suspicious phrase, 7 dials. It must be deeply connected to Wade's death. Eileen's feelings for Wade were not just mere infatuation. Moreover, it was thanks to Wade that her brother's body had the chance to be brought back home. Therefore, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, even if it meant sacrificing her life, she would pursue the truth. Ronnie was finally convinced by Eileen's determination. He agreed to help her investigate the meaning of the 7 dials. As they parted ways, Eileen spotted her stalker. She followed him until he entered a phone booth. After he left, she immediately climbed into the booth and called the operator, successfully reconnecting the call. Eileen went home and told her mother she was going to see a doctor. Then she drove towards London. Shortly after she left, the butler brought her an anonymous letter addressed to her. It warned her not to interfere further in the 7 dials, or she would lose her life. Unaware of the danger ahead, she pressed onward until she saw an unbelievable sight and slammed on the brakes. Ronnie lay on the road, covered in blood, barely alive. Before his last breath, he left behind a final clue, a series of fragmented words about haunting memories and 7 children. Ronnie's funeral ended faster than expected. Following his wishes, Eileen recounted the entire event to Jimmy. However, Jimmy was extremely surprised as he and Ronnie weren't even close friends. Why did Ronnie specifically want him to know everything? His cryptic words were truly inexplicable. During their conversation, Eileen learned that Wade's death was due to Jimmy contacting the May Hotel. Moreover, he seemed to have a soft spot for the girl, so Eileen agreed to let him help arrange a meeting with May and return the letter Wade had left behind. As they walked and talked, Eileen noticed the stalker had reappeared nearby, seemingly deliberately following her. Just like before, he glanced at Eileen and then quickly got into his car and sped away. This time, Eileen wasn't going to let him get away. She chased after him, driving around central London until she stopped in front of the London Police Department headquarters. By this point, Eileen had almost figured out his identity. She boldly stormed into the office. The man was an inspector working at the London Police Department. Like Eileen, he believed that Wade's death was shrouded in mystery. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case had been closed and could only be investigated privately. Wade died in the room Eileen had stayed in, and after the murder, Eileen was the first to discover the body. Based on his investigative experience, those 2 coincidences were enough to make him suspect Eileen as the culprit, which is why he kept following her. Eileen didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she asked the inspector why, since he was also in charge of Ronnie's death, the press hadn't reported it yet, and why the police hadn't begun gathering clues. In response, the inspector explained that he had requested a delay in publishing the news to facilitate a more discreet investigation. Eileen continued to ask if 7 dials was connected to the Foreign Office and if the Caterham couple were suspects. What exactly did that mean? The barrage of questions made the inspector somewhat uncomfortable. In the past, he would have been the one in the interrogation position, questioning others. Eileen showed the letter to the inspector. He informed her that the 7 dials area was located in a slum that had largely been demolished and rebuilt. But there is still one place, the 7 Dials Club, that remains in its original location. It was unclear whether the focus was on the entire area or just this particular club. The inspector repeatedly warned that the case was far from simple, as it involved the Foreign Office and the Caterham couple. These were high society figures with unfathomable power. power. He hoped Eileen wouldn't get involved easily. That evening, Eileen went to Fatty. He was very familiar with the Seven Dials Club, a nightclub frequented by all sorts of people and occasionally visited by members of the Foreign Office. With Fatty's guidance, the two knocked on the club's door. Eileen was astonished to find that the person who opened the door was a former servant of the Chimney Manor. However, after Wade's incident, this person had left. Eileen, consumed by grief over the loss of her lover, was completely unaware of this. Compared to the quiet of the slum at night, the club's lively atmosphere seemed utterly out of place. From the moment Eileen entered, the other person stared intently at her, as if trying to see through her true intentions. Eileen joined the dancing crowd until the other person distracted her and left. She then left Fatty behind and slipped through a secret door in the club. She then went up the stairs to the second floor, turned into a long, dark corridor, and pried open the door to the innermost room. Inside was a round table shaped like a clock face, with 7 numbers on the tabletop corresponding to 7 seats. Not far away was a furnace with a stone pedestal. Before she could understand the meaning of these things, chaotic footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door to the room suddenly locked, preventing her from opening it. In her panic, she could only hide in the wardrobe. Outside, 6 people wearing black cloaks entered. They wore fashionable masks, each displaying a unique symbol. Eileen overheard them mentioning Ronnie's death and said that the police had ruled it an accident, so there were no lasting consequences. In a few days, the Secretary of State will hold a gathering at the monastery to welcome Dr. Cartwright. The formula in his possession is extremely important. Therefore, the leader of the Men in Black has sent number 7 to the monastery. They must clear all obstacles at all costs. Afterwards, Eileen recounts everything she saw and heard to Jimmy. Both believe that the deaths of Wade and Ronnie are very likely connected to this mysterious organization in black. At this time, May arrives as arranged. She is Wade's half-sister, who lived in Italy for many years and only returned last year. According to her, the two siblings had a very deep bond, so his death was a great shock to her. Eileen takes out the letter and shows it to May, asking if she knows what 7 Dials is. May explains that she had previously wanted to invite Wade to this club, but he got angry and said it wasn't a place a well-behaved girl like her could go. Jimmy suddenly woke up and wondered if Wade's harsh reaction was because he already knew the organization's secret. At this point, May's slip of the tongue forced Eileen to explain that they suspected the black organization was responsible for Wade and Ronnie's deaths. Now they wanted to go to the monastery to steal Dr. Cartwright's formula and might commit further crimes. Therefore, she and Jimmy planned to infiltrate the monastery to investigate discreetly. May wanted to go along, but Jimmy refused, saying that acting together would attract more attention. May looked too frail and could easily be targeted by the killer. The gathering at the monastery was an invitation-only event, requiring permission from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He had no intention of hosting a banquet for the nobility, so he relied on Eileen's family, who were well-versed in etiquette, for guidance. Since her father's death, her mother had become averse to social interaction. Her mother deliberately designed a long, winding driveway in front of the villa to deter visitors. To please her mother, Eileen reluctantly agreed to receive the Secretary of State. Upon meeting, he repeatedly emphasized the confidentiality of the gathering. It turned out that Dr. Cartwright had invented a special process for manufacturing steel. The processed steel had extremely high tensile strength. Even a thin wire could achieve the hardness of a steel bar. If used correctly, it would significantly increase military power. But if it fell into the hands of the enemy, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, his superiors had secretly ordered the Secretary of State to quickly sign an agreement with Dr. Cartwright to obtain the formula. However, he himself was completely incapable of hosting Dr. Cartwright. That's why Eileen's mother gave him these books. The Secretary of State also revealed that he had received a warning letter containing the 7 Dials. The letter stated that if he insisted on proceeding, his life would be in danger. Every nation in the world coveted this formula. The Germans were also looking for ways to intervene. The warning letter didn't deter the Foreign Secretary. On the contrary, it only strengthened his resolve to expedite the process. He was deeply grateful for Eileen's help and made an exception, allowing her to attend the gathering. At the appointed time, she met Jimmy, Fatty, and the Caterham couple were also on the guest list. Because of the warning letter, the Foreign Secretary even arranged for an inspector to provide extra security. Everyone was busy preparing for the party. The first activity was hunting, and it was said that Mr. Caterham was an exceptionally skilled marksman. He could switch hands flexibly and easily shoot birds in midair. Soon after, Dr. Cartwright arrived in his special vehicle. Due to fatigue from the long journey, he didn't participate in the hunt, only briefly asking everyone questions before returning to the monastery to rest. Eileen pulled Jimmy aside and voiced her suspicion that Ronnie had signs of injury on his chest when he died. The perpetrator was clearly highly skilled with firearms. Mr. Caterham was the one who repeatedly fired at at his target, which fit this description perfectly. Considering his possible connection to the Seven Dials organization, could Mr. Caterham be the number 7 himself? As night fell, everyone gathered at the Riverside restaurant. Mr. Caterham asked Dr. Cartwright to demonstrate the effectiveness of his formula. The others didn't object. Dr. Cartwright proudly produced a pocket watch and explained that he had always pursued the creation of an indestructible metal. The watch's case was made from the metal in his formula, possessing corrosion resistance, non-corrosive properties, the ability to withstand extremely high temperatures, and incredible durability. The pocket watch was shot at close range with a shotgun, yet the case showed almost no damage. This astonishing resistance to impact left everyone in awe and completely convinced. The Secretary of State instructed Dr. Cartwright that he would store the formula and samples in a safe in his room. The entire manor was guarded by police, so they thought nothing would happen. When everyone returned to their rooms to rest, Aileen and Jimmy secretly went upstairs to the second floor, but Fatty stopped them. Reluctantly, she revealed her plan: to ambush anyone attempting to steal the formula near Dr. Cartwright's room. Considering Aileen was a woman and might be difficult to deal with, Jimmy suggested he stand guard for the first half of the night, with Fatty taking turns. The gun he secretly carried could also be used interchangeably. Actually, she didn't intend to sit idly by waiting. She took a lightweight black outfit from her suitcase and changed into it for convenience. She tried to climb out through the second floor window, but the vines broke, causing her to fall into the bushes. Brushing herself off, she prepared to find Dr. Cartwright's room when the patrolling inspector outside was drawn by the noise. He gripped her arm tightly, ordering her to return to her room and stay still, or he would arrest her as a suspect. She went back to the second floor and immediately went outside to check the situation, only to find that Jimmy, who was supposed to be on guard duty, had disappeared. Fatty's room was also empty. Two people who were alive and well had suddenly vanished without a trace. At that moment, a chaotic crashing sound, like a car, and a few curses erupted from the first floor. Aileen followed the sound and rushed to the door of another room. She only heard a gunshot, and then the room suddenly fell silent. When the awakened people rushed to open the door and went inside, they found Jimmy lying motionless in front of a wide-open window, and the killer had vanished. That scene brought back memories of many years ago when she was a little girl, and her brother's body was brought home to be placed in a coffin. Experiencing the separation of life and death for the first time left her mind blank. The clearest thing she heard was the sound of the coffin being nailed shut and the incessant ticking of her father's watch. She awoke from her painful memories and, along with everyone else, went to the window to check. Fortunately, they found Jimmy had been shot in the right arm, but his life was not in danger. He frantically said that he had just seen a masked man sneak into the room and try to escape through the window. When he tried to stop him, the assailant opened fire. Hearing this, Aileen and the inspector immediately rushed into Dr. Cartwright's room. He was fast asleep, and on the floor was the exact sleeping pills that had caused Wade's death. Luckily, he hadn't used much, so his life wasn't in danger. However, the safe in the room had been opened, and the formula stored inside was gone. The police immediately sealed off the entire monastery. Jimmy and Dr. Cartwright received timely medical attention. At the same time, the inspector also apprehended someone who had tried to sneak in. It turned out to be May. She said she was truly worried about her brother's death, and that after the murder, Jimmy was the only one who had given her warmth. Fearing for his safety, she couldn't help but follow them here. Jimmy insisted that the masked man he saw was a burly fellow, completely unlike May, so she was not involved. When they counted everyone present, they suddenly noticed Mr. Caterham was missing. He then appeared, gun in hand, saying that he had gone for a walk and found the gun on the lawn because he couldn't sleep. He guessed that the killer had simply thrown it away after shooting Jimmy. Regardless, anyone remaining at the monastery at this time was under suspicion. The police immediately sealed off all entrances and exits. Since the stolen formula hadn't been moved yet, the inspector ordered no one to leave until the investigation was complete. The monastery remained gloomy the next morning. After a sleepless night without finding any clues, Aileen paced back and forth on the lawn where the gun was found. Her doubts kept her awake all night. The foreign minister was also sleepless. Besides worrying about the whereabouts of the formula, he felt an indescribable emotion welling up inside him, a feeling for Aileen. Compared to the women he had met, she was unusually different, so he came to propose to her early that morning. Aileen, startled, jumped into the bushes. Before he could catch up, she went to the inspector to ask if he had found anything. Although he didn't want to reveal anything, with her keen observation, she noticed a dent in the grass. If the masked man had carelessly thrown the gun away while fleeing, it couldn't have created such a deep dent. Moreover, there was only one row of footprints around. After the killer disappeared, Mr. Caterham also came here to pick up the gun, so there should have been 2 rows of footprints. Ultimately, it didn't make sense. From this, Aileen deduced that the gun had been thrown forcefully out of the convent window. It was a gift from Wade, so it was extremely important. The inspector had no choice but to send someone to follow her back to the room to search. As they were about to continue discussing the bullet, Aileen's attention was drawn to a charred glove. This was also evidence found last night. Someone had thrown it into the fireplace, but it hadn't burned completely. The gray ash indicated the killer had worn it to avoid leaving fingerprints. Jimmy broke the awkward silence. He was the first to try on the glove, but it was too big for him. Aileen also noticed clear bite marks on the glove. It was obvious someone had used force to pull it off. The inspector returned to the issue of the two bullets. The one picked up in the yard was fired from Jimmy's gun, zooing through the window frame and lodged in a tree trunk in the yard. The other bullet matched the gun that Mr. Caterham had picked up. It went through Jimmy's arm and lodged in a chair in the room. Furthermore, only Mr. Caterham's fingerprints were on that gun. Therefore, unless it could be proven that the killer was actually wearing gloves when holding the gun, Mr. Caterham could not be cleared of suspicion. Next, the inspector asked Mr. Caterham to try throwing the gun toward the lawn. He used too much force, and the angle of the throw was clearly off target. But after checking, the inspector told everyone that the new indentation from the gun's fall was exactly the same depth as the old one. This proved Aileen's deduction was correct. The gun had indeed been thrown from this room. Mr. Caterham's actions, on the contrary, made the inspector feel that he was deliberately trying to conceal his motives. No one expected that the policeman accompanying May would be seriously injured in the head and collapse right at the door. Meanwhile, the drawing room was empty. Taking advantage of the lax security, a car belonging to the Caterham couple sped out of the monastery. On the passenger seat were the stolen formula and samples. Aileen and the group immediately chased after May towards the main road. Jimmy ran, his mind racing. He realized that with such an important formula in her hands, May must have guessed she was being hunted down. Therefore, she wouldn't be running around aimlessly. She was most likely heading to the train station to escape. Sure enough, when the three of them arrived, the Caterham couple's car was parked in front of the station. Jimmy's guess was completely correct. They sped off, their figures barely visible, and spotted May the moment she boarded the train. They had barely gotten inside when the train departed. Each carriage was crowded with passengers, and searching each one individually would be a waste of time. Fatty offered to check the carriages ahead, while Aileen and Jimmy stayed behind to question the passengers. But at this moment, Jimmy felt something was amiss. Why was Fatty so determined to act alone at this time? He quickly told Aileen his suspicion that Fatty might have aided in the poisoning of Dr. Cartwright, mixing the formula and throwing it to Wade May, who was waiting in the yard. Then, by attacking Jimmy, he would create a distraction and give May a chance to escape. It all made perfect sense. Only Fatty knew about Aileen and Jimmy's surveillance plan. He knew Jimmy's guard post. Moreover, when Aileen went to look for Fatty that night, he wasn't in his room. Conversely, he was the one who led Aileen to the Seven Dials Club. At that time, Aileen even thought she had locked herself in her room. It was very possible that he was also responsible. Aileen and Jimmy immediately ran forward and found Fatty confronting May with a gun. Compared to exposing Fatty's true identity, Aileen was more interested in knowing why May stole the formula. May painfully explained that Wade was killed because of that formula. She did it simply to fulfill her brother's dying wish. But that justification not only failed to lessen Aileen's suspicions, but also intensified her disgust. The truth was laid bare, yet May still wanted to use Wade's name to escape punishment. Aileen suddenly remembered a detail she had almost overlooked: the glove in the furnace and the bite marks on it. All the clues immediately connected. There was no large, masked man in the monastery. Jimmy was left-handed when holding the gun. He wore the glove and then shot himself in the right arm, faking an attack. To avoid leaving fingerprints, he used his teeth to pull the glove off and hide it in the furnace. Then he threw the gun used to stage the attack onto the lawn. And May's appearance, pretending to look for an earring and then using the opportunity to escape, was all part of their plan. She was indeed very quick-witted. The game ended here. Jimmy fired at Fatty to provide cover for May to escape to another train car. Seeing his plan about to succeed, he arrogantly confessed that he and May had collaborated solely to sell the formula for a huge sum of money. Taking advantage of his momentary lapse in attention, Aileen grabbed a nearby suitcase, threw it forcefully at him, and then picked up the gun Fatty had dropped, firing several shots in quick succession. In the ensuing chaos, Jimmy snatched back the formula and fled. Aileen finally had a chance to check Fatty's wounds. Fortunately, they weren't life-threatening. He had just managed to snatch Dr. Cartwright's sample from May. The bullets had hit the hard outer shell, but inadvertently saved his life. The train hadn't stopped yet, and the opportunity to retrieve the formula still remained. Aileen began questioning each carriage. Under the starry sky, the final confrontation was between the two of them. With the dark barrel of a gun pointed directly at him, Jimmy was forced to confess to all his and May's crimes. times. In fact, Wade had vaguely realized that the two wanted to steal the formula. May, fearing he would stop her, had drugged him the night of the party. She sneaked into the room, placed a bottle of sleeping pills on the bedside table, deliberately staging a fake accident. Jimmy knew Fatty intended to play a clock prank on Wade, so he tried to distract them. He even intentionally placed the clocks in the room on the fireplace. Ronnie, having come so close to the truth, was killed by Jimmy. At this point, Aileen suddenly realized that Ronnie's dying wish wasn't for her to tell Jimmy about the 7 dials, but rather a reminder that Jimmy himself was involved. Jimmy appeared glamorous, but he was deeply in debt. He was blinded by money, but with his intellect and connections, he was definitely not the mastermind behind the whole affair. According to him, the real mastermind was waiting for a transaction at the first-class court. All the plans, both domestic and international, were manipulated by that person. Aileen couldn't hold back any longer and beat him up. Then she retrieved the formula and headed towards the first-class court. Jimmy's final warning only intensified Aileen's nerves. Why couldn't she go to the first-class station? Was it because the mastermind's methods were too brutal, or was there another reason? For some reason, the closer she got, the faster her heart raced. This feeling of unease seemed to stem from some kind of emotional connection. Each step closer was also a severance of that connection. Suppressing her anxiety, she pulled open the compartment door, only to find the train had stopped. Disappointment, like a tidal wave, surged through her. Clinging to a last glimmer of hope, she asked why her mother was there. Her mother kept saying that Aileen had previously advised her to get more exercise, and she had followed that advice. Her mother's eyes and expression were as gentle as ever. In the past, Aileen would have trusted her mother without hesitation. But now things were different. Faced with Aileen's relentless questioning, her mother knew she couldn't hide it any longer. She admitted that everything was her doing. That formula could protect the country. But why would she want to sell it to those who could harm the nation? She was betraying her country. The country had betrayed her. Aileen's brother was sent to war by a drunken, deranged general, and he died. That act meant nothing to the war effort. His sacrifice was not glorious, but it was enough to destroy a perfect family. Aileen's son also died in secret national campaigns. Her mother lost the person she loved most, and she couldn't bring herself to hate. After her husband and son died, there was no one left to care for the family. They were left with only the empty title of nobility and a mansion. But that wasn't worth much. They soon found themselves penniless. That's why her mother rented the mansion to the Caterham couple for their party. If she had the money, she absolutely wouldn't have done that. Cornered, she finally set her sights on Dr. Caterham's formula. Cartwright hoped to maintain his former glamorous life, but no reason could justify his act of betraying the nation. Even facing her own mother, Aileen trembled as she pointed her gun at her. Her mother, stunned, asked if she could really bring herself to do it. Fatty and the inspector arrived just in time to witness the struggle between the two. They immediately understood everything. Aileen, holding back tears, turned and walked away, but her unsteady, illusory steps betrayed her complete inner breakdown. Jimmy and May were both arrested, and the case finally closed. Aileen didn't look back. She stayed in her large house, embracing her empty heart to heal herself. She remembered the party when Wade waved to her. They were so close then, just a hair's breadth apart. But when she calmed down, she realized that the promise from years ago was both so close, yet so far away. Dr. Cartwright handed the formula to the Secretary of State, and both sides signed the agreement, a successful conclusion reached in shared joy. Meanwhile, Aileen stood alone in front of the villa, silently. Just then, the doorman of the 7 Dials Club approached and said, "My boss cordially invites you to attend." Returning to the slum and going up to the second floor of the 7 Dials Club, 6 men in black cloaks were already seated around a round table. Aileen pulled out the only empty chair and sat down, at which point the man numbered 7 removed his mask. No one expected it to be the inspector who had been closely investigating the case. He told Aileen that the 7 Dials Association was actually a legitimate organization operating secretly. Aileen had misunderstood the content of the meeting she had overheard earlier. The claim that Ronnie's death was an accident with no lasting consequences was actually to avoid attracting too much attention, preventing the real culprit from revealing himself. And sending number 7 to the monastery to clear the evidence was only to ensure security and protect the formula, not to steal it. Then, he had someone place a mask on the round table and said it was the mask her father had once used. As early as 1920, he was a member of the 7 Dials Society, his identity so secretive that even Aileen's mother was unaware. At that time, he was directly responsible for protecting Dr. Cartwright and the formula, but he was brutally murdered by opposing forces. Dr. Cartwright miraculously survived, but he had to hide in the shadows for many years before daring to reappear. The secret room of the 7 Dials Club originally had 7 seats, and the chair that was always left empty was to commemorate him. After this period of trial, the young man realized that Aileen inherited her father's sharp sharp intellect and integrity. Therefore, after discussing with the other members, he decided to officially invite her to join. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.